Hi guys, I'm back to try a prompt with you here on the Lanzon Stele at Chavinda-Wantar. It is based on anthropomorphic imagery, which is basically animal and human. I want to be specific, guys. If you see that word, that means animal really with human. It might be confusing where you're really melding the two things together to make a composite creature. That's what anthropomorphic is. So please don't read that and go, those are two separate things. They have to be animals and there have to be humans. That's not what we're talking about. This is where it basically morphs the two together. Okay. I wanted to try one too without like annotating on the prompt or screen. I wanted to try and see if I could replicate something on notebook paper that might be helpful. Now, there's any number of ways that you could do this. And believe me, by now we've done so many of them. If you're able to see the structure on the screen and know that you've got like a T1, T2, so forth and so on, you're not required to pull out a sheet of paper and go through the process if it's a little inconvenient for you. Okay. So for those of you who can't print, or printing is inconvenient, please don't feel like you're at a disadvantage. We just have to answer all parts of the question, and we're going to do whatever we need to do to be able to find all those pieces or parts. Okay, so I've got my trusty notebook paper here, and we are working with this anthropomorphic Lanzon Stele. This picture is really super difficult because you've got the stone like lance in front of you, but you really cannot see the actual imagery. For this, I have to remember from class the day that I showed this figure that has his hand up and down, okay? And he's standing there with contour rivalry is going on. I see a lot of incised lines there that kind of confuse my read of the figure. People come into this very, very dark space deep into the caves of Chavinda-Wantar, and apparently from a room above, a voice echoes down and says what needs to be said about this particular, or by this particular oracle. The figure seems to be kind of like a conduit from the earth to the sky, because one hand is going down, one hand is going up, and he's something that only appears and makes sense when you have appropriately administered the hallucinogenic drugs that makes the figure stand out. Okay. So he's kind of like a transformational figure, and because there's parts of him that look like legs and human arms and parts of it that look like claws and jaws, we have this kind of composite figure that works real well for this question. Of course, that imagery is tied to beliefs and practices. So we're going to jump into reading this, okay? The work shown is the Lanzon Stele at Chavinda-Wantar in the northern highlands of Peru. It's made of granite from 900 BCE and 200 CE. The statue's anthropomorphic, animal, and human imagery connects to specific Chavin spiritual beliefs and practices. So I already know from that what my theme is. I'm just going to write all over my page, anthropomorphic, okay, imagery, right? And I hope you guys can see that. I'm just making a note of the theme here, right? It's almost like I've gone straight to blocking this out. And you read the second part of this, spiritual beliefs and practices, on your screen, then you kind of have to add the two ideas together. So, we could talk about images of animals and humans combined for lots of different things, but this specific thing has to tie the two of them to beliefs and practices, okay? Now that seems silly, I know, but now you have the theme, right? And you'll never forget that if you get down to the lower parts of this. So it's all there for you, okay? Select and identify another work in which anthropomorphic imagery connects to specific spiritual belief and or practice. You may select a work from the list below or any other relevant work. So the door is wide open. Still, for those of you that are reading from the screen, I think I would go immediately to the list of things that are suggested and pick one. So that you have more time to formalize what you want to do. Since you can't annotate on the page and really break this thing apart, you might want to start with a clear choice in mind. Either it could be the elephant mask, it could be the Sphinx, or Lentil 25. The elephant mask, the Aka elephant mask from the Bamileke culture, you guys remember there's a human face on the top part of the mask in between the ears, and it's combined with the trunk features that hang down the front of the performer's gown or tunic. So we're blending those two human and animal things together, and we probably at some point need to describe that and where it is. The Sphinx, obviously the Great Sphinx who guards the middle pyramid at the pyramid complex at Giza. He is a guardian sort of figure that's kind of all-knowing, all-seeing. Some people posit that the face on the Sphinx is actually the face of the pharaoh Khafre, who is the person who's buried or supposedly buried in the middle pyramid. It's combined with the feline features of a lion, so watchful guardian who's kind of watching to make sure everything is on the up and up. Lentil 25 is a Mayan work, and you may not recognize the imagery just from the title. The idea, we have Lady Jacques, and she has just done some bloodletting to call forth a transformational figure who starts off as a snake in the lower left-hand side of the composition, and by the middle of the composition opens its mouth for an ancestor to emerge. So the anthropomorphic kind of goes between the snake and the human. So that gives you kind of a background for which one you would feel most comfortable with, but I would begin up there by just picking that, okay? We know right off the bat we're gonna have to at some point describe the visual features. So I've gone ahead and put those blocks there. They may happen as part of the initial challenge. I see it right there, so I'm thinking that's what we got to do. I would take my verbs and write them. Okay, describe, since I can't annotate them. And then the next one, skip down, is explain. The next one is explain. And we're not going to write the whole prompt. These are just the ideas that help us go, okay, my task is I got to know what to do here. And I can't reach into the screen and grab the thing that I want to annotate. My next thing, explain. Now, as long as you are able to kind of visualize the different pieces or parts of the questions, that's what our job is here. And it starts off by saying, okay, describe the anthropomorphic imagery of both the Lanzon stela and your selected work. Okay. Having looked at the samples, I know that sometimes describe is going to be part of explain. So I'll show you that when I debrief the question. But for now, all we're having to do is describe. So I'm going to say T1, T2, describe 3 things here that are visual characteristics of anthropomorphic imagery. And I'm going to put AI, okay? Using visual evidence, where is my anthropomorphic imagery? Okay. So you have to know the works well enough without them in front of you to describe where the human and the animal is being combined or merged. They're not asking you to do much more than that with this. So I'm going to pull this back over. It says, using specific visual evidence from both works, explain a similarity in how the two works make use or make formal use, of the anthropomorphic imagery we see. All right, there is a lot in there. So this is the part that we have to unpack, and where I wish that you had annotation, you don't, no big deal. Why don't we say the next thing you need to do is find out if it's a similarity or difference, right? So in this case, similarity. All right, explain. Why don't we do this? Okay. And then explain how. Okay, how this thing, now we don't have a similarity there, right? We're explaining how this thing performs a cultural function. Okay, I'll pull that back over in a second. This last little thing explains at least one difference, right? Okay. So you can kind of see we're basically doing the same thing and breaking down the whole question, just making sure that we're doing the right thing at the right time. So let's go back to this. Describe the, okay, we've already done that. Explain a similarity and how the two works make formal use. All right, so now what evidence, right? We can write that with form, explain a similarity. Did you recognize that, guys? Formal use. Some of you are going to look at that word and think, oh, prom and formals and, highbrow instead of lowbrow. That's not going to ever happen to you here. That word simply means, let's talk about form, right? So how the two works make formal use or compositional use, if that's a better word, of the anthropomorphic imagery we see. You just got to describe basically how it's used, right? Is it vertical? Is it horizontal? Is it, swirly like the snake? I mean, basically you have to get in there and say how the composition looks to you, right? And how that AI or imagery is used. So let's say, explain how form, sorry, this is going to be challenging. Similarity in how the two works make use of form. Okay, so explain a similarity with form. Is that basically all we need? Similarity and how the two works make form. Yeah, that's enough. Explain similarity with form of both images. Okay, that might be helpful. Both AIs. Okay, both AIs. Can you read that? All right. Using specific visual and or contextual evidence now. Okay, we can go how with VE or CE, right? The anthropomorphic imagery helps to complete a cultural function. Okay, so we were talking about form here. Now we're moving on to function. Explain how with either VE or CE, AI helps function. Okay. If it helps you to verbalize this stuff too, since you can't annotate quietly, then it's okay if somebody hears you talking, trying to figure out the terms and the words that we're sharing, right? Just let mom and dad know that you're trying to sound it out and make it work. It's fine. Do what works, okay? Explain at least one difference in how each culture uses AI to connect to a specific belief and or practice. So we really have a similarity. We really have a difference. Okay. So that is formal, functional. I wonder if this is contextual. Yes, it is. Okay. So use specific contextual evidence about both the lens on stela and your selected work in your explanation. Okay. So now let's say how AI, and that's anthropomorphic imagery, not artificial intelligence, right? To connect to a specific belief or practice, how AI connects to belief, just something that we all share and think is true, to something that we do or practice, okay? Or something. We have the choice to do and or. And this is all with CE. Okay. Now, with that information, you should have enough, I think, basically with the prompt on the screen and you're writing on notebook paper to label your points and feel more confident about having a plan. What I want you to promise me is even if you're not going to print, that you won't start writing until you have mapped out what you're going to talk about first, what you're going to talk about second. Because believe me, if you get into the computer and you start typing up this stuff, the technology is going to overwhelm you. If you just start typing up your answer and you get words on the screen, by the second page, you're going to forget what you've done. So this gives you a checklist. Did I describe that? Did I do that? Did I do that and that and that? And we're not done yet, but you can kind of see how this makes the same kind of checklist, right? So this should work out well. If you have a printer, if you don't have a printer, you just have to think through the steps, okay? Now, some of you might be able just to go straight to blocking, and that's okay too, okay? But I really think that you need to digest these later parts of the question because they get infinitely more complex. Take a look here. We're not done with this. One difference in how each culture uses AI to connect to a specific belief and or practice. Use specific contextual evidence about both the lands on stele and your selected work. So I really have a pyramid right here of thinking where I have the idea, the difference, but I got to have, right, my evidence from both where I talk about one work here and one work there. And it's all about this difference, right? So, okay, I'm thinking that this is 2 points since we've got both the selected work and the lens on stele. I think maybe this is 1 point because you're talking about both works and a similarity. Okay. This I think is probably going to be one task, although I see both and there that makes me suspicious when that's been underlined. If that's going to be 2 points plus another one, I don't know. So we really need to make note of that from both AIs, both works. Okay. And both works here, right? So work 1, work 2. I mean, you can make this work for what you need it for. Now I'm going to take another color here. I'm going to go back and make sure that we have our points. There's T1, there's T2. Those are entry-level points that are description, fairly simple about anthropomorphic imagery and beliefs and practices. Here is T3, explain a similarity with formal properties or formal considerations of both AIs, right? The keyword is there. So some of you might mark this as a T3, T4. Okay, I'm going to mark it as a T3 because I think it's like say something and back it up. But as long as you know you got to do both of those things, then I think you're going to get that full point. This had both and underlined, so I'm watching that one. I better make darn well sure I talk about both of the works in order to understand how AI helps this thing do its cultural function. So you might very well go T4, T5. I'm going to put a T4 there for now, okay, because I know that I've got down here a T5, okay, that I need to talk about and answer. Explain one difference in how the anthropomorphic imagery connects to a specific belief or practice using contextual evidence. And I know that I've got to talk about my first work, T6, and my second work, T7. I mean, they might throw in like an 8-pointer here, but look what we've done. We've basically identified all the different parts of the question. So it's going to work fine either way. You just have to commit that first 2 or 3 minutes to looking at what you're going to do and making a plan before you write. Okay. So if I put this prompt back here and we start talking about what we could write, right? The description, I think, is going to come fairly easy because you just basically have to say where you're seeing that imagery, right? Here you have to say how that imagery is tied to the form of the piece. Here, for example, lands on stele. This is a vertical piece where the figure stretches one arm down and one arm up, and we see, you can see fangs and a face and a couple of other humanoid kind of elements with those two things combined. So kind of suggests that this is the magnet that pulls the heaven to the earth, and at this moment you'll know all things that are true, right? So that gives you an idea. Basically, this has got to be, because it's a conduit, it's got to be vertical, right? The elephant mask, that's meant to be worn. So the facial features are woven right under the front of the mask and basically combined with elephant features. So you need to say something about where we see that changing shape. Elephant trunk, human face, elephant ears, human eyes, nose, mouth. I mean, be very specific. Don't be general on these things because they want to know if you can recall and describe that thing well enough that they know you know it. The Sphinx, well, we have the human head wearing like a Nemes headdress, like what the pharaohs used to wear on their heads. And we know that's a royal symbol, matched with the lower body, legs, tail, everything from a large cat, a lion, right? So we can definitely see where the connection is. It's basically an animal body with a human head. So we've described basically where that is. Formally, this guy as a guardian lays flat across the plane that he's installed on, right? It's a sculpture that goes this way instead of up like this. So the idea is that you could make that distinction. As a guardian, he takes a reclinant or recumbent position, sitting with his legs out. This guy is standing with one arm down, one arm up. So it changes the form of the two. I hope that helps. As a lintel, this goes over a doorway. So it's going to be a flat piece, heavily sculpted out. But basically, because of you're having to see it as you go into the inner sanctum of that temple, it's going to be just a panel that's over your heads. So it's going to look more, it's going to have to be a relief, right? Instead of a freestanding piece of sculpture. So the anthropomorphic imagery shows up in the image that Lady Jacques sees. So it gives us an idea of what's going on inside that temple. And because it's a curvilinear form that kind of occupies the majority of that composition, we know that's what we're supposed to be looking at primarily. Okay. Just ideas, guys, here about what you might say, a similarity in how the two works make use of formal anthropomorphic imagery. Here you have a supernatural being that's referenced. So that would be great with, say, lintel 25, right? Here you have a figure who's guarding the truth, and it makes sense that the guardian pose would fit the Sphinx as well as this guy that's standing there. The elephant mask, that's anthropomorphic imagery that's used to connote a ruler or powerful being or powerful patron. The priests at Chauvin de Huantar, who are in charge of this information, are in control of what you're going to read from this oracle, right? They make the voices in the room above. They carry you through the process as guides. You're going to need their intercession in order to access this information. So there are lots of ways that we could do that kind of thinking. How the anthropomorphic imagery helps both the lands on stele and your selected work to effectively complete a cultural function. This is like the destination for information, right? This is where you come to find out what direction you're supposed to go. The elephant mask, the leader, is who you go to there to find out what your role is in society. That might be a possible connection where you could talk about a cultural function. The vision of the oracle, the vision of the dancing performer who's got the APAH elephant mask on, might be a way that you could go with that. Let's see, a cultural function, the Sphinx as guardian of information, the being that's morphing over our heads, kind of gives you a sense that these dark places are where we're going to find those magical creatures, and that's what we have here too. Okay, specific cultural function. I think that's enough information so that you could basically get the idea of how that would work. Explain at least one difference in how each culture uses imagery to connect to a specific belief and or practice. Chauvin, widely believed or widely held by the archaeological evidence that this is kind of a source for knowledge, and that people come here from all over the coastal plains and the highlands in order to kind of see what their oracle can tell them. In terms of contextual evidence for the elephant mask, we know that it's part of a performance. It's an experience. This is also an experience when you see the lands on stele. The Sphinx is tied to a specific site, as is the lands on stele. If you're trying to do this for lintel 25, these are interior chambers that basically mark the place where that illumination is going to happen. I mean, for lack of a better word, there is a lot of information there. Now, if you're having trouble, guys, remembering all of that contextual evidence, remember all three of these I taught you in the first couple of weeks together, and you may not have been comfortable with the whole process at that point. So that's where you can go back to Miss Marcia Russell's notes. You can look at Doug Dericott's website. You can go back to your notes and flesh them out using Khan Academy. But those were early in the days that we were together. So that's a pretty good review, I think. Okay. I wanted to demonstrate that one for you. And again, if you're saying this is T3, T4, T5, T6, and you've got way more points than I do, that's okay. That's fine. As long as you're answering all parts of the question, I think you're going to do fine using just notebook paper. Okay. So I will leave it there, and we'll talk about the short answer here in just a second.